So my name is Valentino Ugbala. I'm a software engineer at Sumosoft. At Sumosoft, we build SDKs for e-commerce platform. I primarily work as a front-end engineer there. I'm also a co-lead at frontendweekly.dev. Frontendweekly.dev it's like a not so weekly event I do with two other awesome engineers where we get to break down nuggets in front-end development. Then I double as a mentor at Enye. Enye is a platform that looks towards upskilling young engineers and with mentorship, by giving them mentorship support and also connecting them to job opportunities both home and abroad. So I'll just go straight to the talk. Yeah, starting projects can be very difficult and it shouldn't be at all. If you're to search for, you're to just make random searches about React Native on Google, you would start seeing crazy words like Expo, React Native CLI, animated, and it can be very, very crazy because you just want to start a project, right? You don't want to learn everything in the whole. You want to read the entire documentation before you can get a Hello World app running. So that leads me to the essence of this talk. Basically, I'll try to demystify the process of starting a new React Native project. We'll try and look at common approaches of starting a new project, and we'll take note of their pros and cons. In the end, you should be able to take less time. I hope in the end you'll be able to take less time in deciding the approach to take whenever you're starting a project. So I'm basically just looking at bootstrapping you with the knowledge you need to start your project, right? So just create your React Native application. So basically, for starting a React Native project, I'll group all the different approaches into 3 categories. The first is when you're starting your project from scratch. The next is when you're making use of a boilerplate. While the third is make use of a visual editor. So we'll look at each of them and we'll look at their pros and cons. So the first is starting the project from scratch. So ideally, there are 2 major ways of starting a project from scratch, right? If you go to, so one is React Native CLI, and the next is Expo CLI. If you're new to React, or even if you're a veteran in React, you'd have heard about these 2. You probably would have heard about CLI or Expo at the point in time. So we'll try to understand what each does and the advantages of using one over the other. React Native CLI, it's pretty much the default way of starting your React Native application. Like if you go to reactnative.dev, the official documentation, you'll see the command for starting your React Native application using that. So you basically just have to run this command and it gives you this entire folder structure. So if you look closely, it gives you a bare metal project, meaning that it obviously makes you start from scratch. So you are given the flexibility to do whatever you want. If you look closely, you'd see that there's an Android folder and an iOS folder. Now this contains native code, like your main activity, the Java and your info, the playlist files, where you could just easily go in case you want to tweak some stuff in the native realm. So you could just go in and make your changes. So what are the pros and cons of using this approach? For the pros, the good thing is that you can add native modules. So if you recall, we saw that it gives us an Android and iOS folder. So you could easily just jump in and make changes and edits. It is much easier to optimize build size in the sense that it's giving a bare metal project, right? So you have control of the different libraries that you're adding, and adding libraries obviously is a factor in determining the final size of your application. You get access to always work with the latest features in React Native, right? This is the default way of starting a React Native project. So things like new stuff like Flipper and Hermes, as soon as they are launched, you could always just jump in and start making use of them. The cons of using this is it can take a bit of time to set up a project properly, especially if you're like a beginner developer, because it's giving a bare metal project, right? So you'd have to go and fetch different libraries, figure out which libraries to use, how to like structure code and stuff like that. And all this could take considerable time while you're starting your application. Adding native modules can be difficult if you have experience as a mobile developer. So like when I first started, if I read articles, they were telling me that I have to go into the main activity, the Java file, or go into the build or Gradle file. Sometimes I always get scared because I really don't have mobile developer experience. So for beginners, especially for guys that are web developers and they are coming into work, it could be a bit of a learning curve to do that. But the good thing is that React Native recently released something called Auto Link. So that actually helps make the process easier of adding native modules. It's really difficult to develop for iOS without a MacBook, right? So if you don't have an Apple Mac, it's a bit annoying because React Native is for building cross-platform applications, and it would be nice if as you're coding, you could always see the iOS and Android version of the app at the same time. But if you're using a Windows system or like Linux system, it's really difficult, and you'd have to do like some hacks in order to make that work. And if you want to share the application, you'd have to build the APK. Now, this is actually the standard way of doing things, like for mobile developers. But the reason why I place it as a con is because there are better ways of doing it, and we'll check that out very soon. So next we look at is Expo CLI. So Expo is like a framework for building universal React Native applications. If you're familiar with React, you'd have heard about Create React App. So that's what Expo gives. Expo gives a lot of tools, right? But majorly it's pretty known for like helping you to bootstrap your React Native project. There are two major approaches towards using it. We have the bare flow and the managed flow, right? Managed flow is actually the one that's been on for quite a while, and it's pretty much common. So we'll focus a lot more on that before rounding back down to the bare flow. If you want to start an Expo project, you basically just install the Expo CLI globally, then you run this command. And once you choose the manage flow option, you get this. Now, if you look at this, you realize that this is much slimmer, that's smaller folders compared to the React Native CLI project folder, in the sense that you don't get the Android and the iOS folder. So this gives you or tells you that when you're developing with Expo, you probably wouldn't need to touch any native module, right? Expo has a way of like abstracting that process and doing it for you under the hood. So you just get to focus on doing the JavaScript that you love. One of the things that Expo has is the Expo development kit. So there's a picture of it. So with it, there's also something called an Expo client app, which you download on your phone. So if you want to debug while you're developing on Expo, once you start your Expo app, this opens on the browser. Then if your device and your laptop are on the same network, you just have to scan this QR code. And once you scan the QR code, you can start debugging your application. It's actually really cool. From here, you could also start up the project on your Android or iOS emulator and so many other cool stuff. So what are the pros and cons of using this approach? You can share the application without having to build or send the APK. So if you look closely, there's a publish or republish section in the Expo development kit. And what that does, it allows you to like, it kind of like build and publish your app at a particular link. So if you want to share your application to like your project manager or some stakeholder, you just do that. And the project manager, all he needs to do is just open up Expo on his application, the Expo client app on his phone. And from there, he can access your application. And you don't even need to like build or put, you don't need to build the application and, send him the APK and stuff like that. It just helps make the process really seamless. It comes with cool stuff, cool tools like OTA, push notifications, and build service. I'll talk about OTA. OTA is short for over-the-air updates. And basically what it means is, imagine a scenario where you have your consumers or clients, so you have your consumers using your application, and you probably just want to add a new feature, just want to probably add a new stuff, show a different design or something on a screen in your application. Instead of going through the stress of building your application, bundling it, and pushing it again to App Store and Apple Store, OTA allows you to like publish it without going through all those parts. So what happens is on your consumers' phones, what they do, the application listens for these changes and just updates the application automatically. And it's a really cool feature. Although it has some limitations, but it's still a pretty nifty tool. You probably won't need to touch native code throughout while you're developing with the Expo. Now, recall that we are still talking about the Expo managed flow, in case you might have forgotten that. So you probably wouldn't need to touch native code at all, because from there you could see that there's no Android and iOS folder. So you don't need to be scared that you can't touch Java code or Objective-C code. What are the cons? The cons of it is the app size is large. A simple Hello World app, a screen that's showing you Hello World is about 20 MB on iOS and 15 MB on Android. And that's crazy. And the truth is, the major reason why that happens is because Expo comes bundled with so many libraries. Like it has React Native, React Navigation, React Screens installed by default. It also has Google XDK and Facebook SDK. So in the event where you're not using Google login or Facebook login in your application, then it's kind of like not necessary having to bundle all that in your application when you're eventually not going to use it. So it's a major pain point because it makes your app large for no reason. You're not even using it at all. So you also can't add native modules, like I mentioned before. There isn't an Android and iOS folder. So if you want to add a native module, especially one that, so the truth is, Expo tries to support as much libraries with native modules as possible, right? So once you're installing it, they help you set up the native modules themselves. But the thing is that there are some libraries that don't support Expo, or Expo doesn't support. So in cases where you want to add a library like that, an example is probably you want to add a Bluetooth library to your application. Expo doesn't currently support that. You would have to eject your application. And ejecting an Expo application basically means you're converting it from the Expo managed flow to a React Native CLI project. So it's more like you're going back to the bare metal project. You lose all the cool stuff that comes with Expo, and like what's the essence of going through the Expo route if at the end of the day you're still going to go back there, right? So that's also a very huge pain point. You're restricted to Expo's services like their push notifications. So I think Expo uses one signal to handle push notifications, and you probably might not want to use that. You might want to use something like code push. But if you're using Expo managed flow, you're limited and restricted to using just that. So this has been like a problem in the community. A lot of people want to use Expo because of the ease of development. The fact that with the Expo development kit, you can connect like 5 of your devices. You can scan the QR code, connect like 5 devices and testing them at the same time, as opposed to when you're just using React Native CLI, where you're only limited to using your simulator or connecting your phone via a USB cord to your system, right? So a lot of people like want to use Expo because of its ease of development, but they are scared of it because of its unnecessarily large size. So the Expo team thought about this and decided to bring something called the Expo CLI bare flow. Recall I mentioned that the bare flow is one of the different flows when you're starting a project with Expo, and I said that I was going to come back to it. So the Expo bare flow is basically gives you the best of both worlds from the managed flow and React Native CLI. So what basically happens is once you start a project with the bare flow, you have a React Native CLI bare metal project, right? So you have all those for your Android and iOS, but you could still add features of Expo through a library called React Native Unit Modules. So with that, it makes it easy for you to access some of the cool stuff that the Expo managed flow gives you. So if you look at this, actually, if you do Expo in it, it gives you this prompts and can get to decide if you want to go to the managed flow or you want to go through the bare flow. So that's awesome. So we're going to look next at making use of a boilerplate. Boilerplate, if you're a web developer, you'll probably be familiar with templates. We use it a lot. So when you probably have like a very short time to do your MVP and you don't want to go through the stress of like building your UI or structuring your application, so you go get something that someone already has done and just tweak it to your fit and work with that. So we obviously have something similar in React Native. Boilerplates, I decided to call them boilerplates. Boilerplates are projects that are set up using Expo and or React Native CLI, and it includes other libraries and code set up to just make your development faster and seamless, right? Some common ones that you'd see are some of them that you'd see are like you have native-based theme, you have Ignite browser, Argon. We'll look at a couple of them before going on. So I tend to break the boilerplates into 2 categories. The first is the category where you have all your screens designed. So in this case, native-based UI team, you could see that on the right, you could see that this is an e-commerce application, and all the screens here are like designed. So this is one of the themes you get when you go to native-based UI marketplace. Now, native-based UI is actually it's a UI library for building applications in React Native. So it comes with stuff like buttons and some other components that you need when you're building your application. So there are other common ones like React Native elements, UI kitting, which is beyond the scope of this talk. So basically what happens at the native-based marketplace is people use native-based UI components to build screens. So you could just go to their marketplace, get like an e-commerce template that somebody already has done, install it, and just change. All you need to do is just probably change the text and update it with your content. Now, the second form of boilerplates that I categorized is when you have a project without your coded screens, right? And that is what Ignite browser does. So basically what it does is that once you start a project with Ignite browser, it pretty much generates a folder structure for you, right? So the problem when you're trying to start an application, let's say you start your application with Expo or React Native, the next thing you start trying to figure out is where do I place files? So where do you place your navigation files? Where do you place where you place your navigation code? Where do you place your store for your application? Where do you place your API services? You know, where do you place services that you use to access async storage? And it can be a pain in the ass because personally I've faced that recently when I have to start a project and I just don't know how to structure my application because there are so many ways to go about doing that. So boilerplates like Ignite browser, what they do is once you start the project using them, they give you a structured application. So you see like folders for where you should place your components, where you should place your screens, where you should place your navigation code, and you don't need to like waste time trying to bother about how to do all those. You just jump in and just write your code. right? So Ignite browser is done by Infinite Red, and they are a really cool contributor towards the React Native community. So what are the pros and cons of using a boilerplate? The pros are it gives you speed in development, because obviously you spend less time trying to think of how to structure application, or in some cases how to like build out your screens. You just have to focus on like your business logic, updating your content, and it helps for you to get your product to market faster. The cons of this approach is it can be bloated, and it can include stuff that you don't need. So like most times templates tend to have include as much screens as possible. And sometimes so a template could have like 30 screens and you probably just need like 5. And if they aren't like exactly, if they are not loosely coupled, you would have to go through a lot of pain trying to remove like the screens that you don't need, because having extra 30 screens means that your application is going to be unnecessarily large. So going through the stress of having to remove those screens can be a bit annoying. Also, it can be difficult to tweak, and it is opinionated in the sense that, for example, for Ignite browser, you could see that it comes with stuff like TypeScript and MobX. It uses MobX for the Redux store. Now, me as a React Native developer, I might not know MobX, but instead I might want to use something like Redux, or I might want to use something like Context. So having to go and tweak the code base in order to like work with the tool I want can be a bit difficult and can lead to waste time, and we obviously do not have time, right? So a good approach of circumventing this would be to like search for libraries that have the tools you want. So like, for example, Infinite has Ignite Andros, and Ignite Andros uses Redux instead of MobX. So you just have to look for what best suits your use case. Now, the last we're going to look at is making use of the visual editor. I'm pretty sure we are familiar with tools like Figma, Adobe XD, or Sketch. So that's pretty much what the visual editor is like. So the visual editors are what you see, what you get tools that enable you to generate your code from design. At the moment, there are like two common ones. The first is BuilderX, and the next is DraftBit. Now, DraftBit isn't public yet, but you could access, you could send them a request to access the application, which is still in beta. Now, BuilderX is actually really cool. BuilderX is built by Geeky Ants, and Geeky Ants are also the people in charge of native-based UI, and it has so many cool features in the sense that so basically the way the interface is, which I'll show in a bit, it's more or less like something similar to like Figma. So you could like drag and drop different UI elements, and as you're doing that, it's automatically generating the code in React and React Native. Like it's super awesome. You see, designers and developers can collaborate on the same project. So imagine a scenario where your designers are just doing the screens. As they're doing the screens, you're just automatically getting the code, which you could just carry and put in your project. Or once they are done, you could just download the entire project and run it on your phone. Like it is mind-blowing. You get to import sketch files, which make life easy, because Sketch is something that a lot of designers use already. So you don't even need to, you just have, it's so easy to import it. Once you just import it, you just converts, gets all the screens, shows all the artboards on the UI, and you could just start working with it, get your components and stuff like that. Then Flex Layout, a problem with a lot of all these UI tools is that, or will I say designers, okay, I'll just say UI tools, is the fact that they tend to favor absolute positioning. So if a designer like designs a screen for an iPhone 11 or for a small device, or let's say, yeah, for a small device, now it could look perfect on that small device. So let's say it was an iPhone 11, right? If I was to like use the same dimensions on to build on an iPhone 11, it will look good, but it will look weird once I try showing it on an iPhone XS Max, and that's because it isn't exactly like responsive. So BuilderX tries to circumvent this issue by introducing this flex layout. So they try their best to convert some of all these parameters from the absolute values to a flex or relative value, so that no matter how your application is, if you design it well, it will stretch appropriately. So you could say that, okay, this image takes 80% of the screen, this button takes 30% of the screen. And I think that is awesome. Then component export. So aside the fact that after doing your designs, you could download the entire project and start running it, you could also just get the code for a particular component, right? So you could just design a screen and just get the code for that screen. So in the event where you probably don't use BuilderX for your final application, once you just design it, you could just copy the code, add it to your separate project, and it just makes life easy for you. So this is an example of me trying to do something with BuilderX. Now, don't laugh at me. I'm not exactly a UI guru, so this was what I could come up with. Basically, this is a small application where you get to see all the speakers of the conference, and once you click on each of their images here, it takes you to their respective screens. So you could see cool stuff like you could it's, you could see that it's like a design tool where you could do stuff like reduce opacity, change the color. You could stack it to the center, or stuff like that. You could also see, so this was like a component I created. So you could create components, and speaker detail is a component that basically has the picture and the text here. So you create components and it generates the components for you to use. Now, after building this, and like probably took me like 5 minutes to get this done, I downloaded the project, and this is it in action. So you could see how awesome it is. Like on the right, you could see the QR code, which means that downloading it gives you like an Expo project. So you could actually continue working on it once you get it downloaded. So you could continue doing your stuff. It gets all the different libraries that you would need to render the application, adds them to your package.json, and you could just like start, continue coding. And that is like a really, really awesome feature. Like I'm really happy for where this is going, because it's going to change a lot about the way things are done, and about the way we could build like quick prototypes and like full-blown applications. Now, what are the pros and cons of using this approach? Pros for sure is that you definitely have speed in development, right? It's easy for you to create working prototypes of application. Okay, so I know that with something like InVision app, you could like connect buttons to each other. But in this scenario, this actually generates the application. So it actually generates application code, and you could just like, so I actually want to demo it, but because of time, I just had to do a video and a picture. So you could basically like set an image to be a touchable, a clickable item, and can connect it, and you could do rules like, okay, if you click on this button, take me to this page. You click on this button, take me back to this page. So that makes it so easy for you to easily create prototypes without like actual so much application logic, and for you to share to your, your stakeholders to like have a feel about how the application looks on their real device. It gives designers superpowers. When I told my designer about this, he was really amazed, right? So that's the cons about this approach is functionalities are a bit limited. I feel everything about it is exactly perfect yet. For example, trying to import from Sketch, it works on some devices. It works for some Sketch files, but for some other Sketch files, it isn't exactly that perfect. And they actually stated this notice that to make it work with Sketch files, there's a bit of like a learning curve and stuff. There's a bit of a way you have to like structure your application for it to work perfectly, right? But these are things that they are building on. Also, the flex layout feature wasn't exactly that great. It's still, for most of my applications, it still gave absolute values. But then again, I'm sure if I took out my time to like look at it better, I could have come up with a better generated code. So in all, it's actually awesome. It's something that they're constantly still building upon, and it's a pretty awesome tool. So that's it about using the visual editor. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for going through this talk with me. I hope we're able to like understand the different approaches of starting a React Native application in 2020, and I hope that it's helped demystify the process a little bit. And moving on, you'd have a bit of knowledge about which approach to go to when you want to start your React Native application. So thank you very, very much.